The easiest lie to believe is the one planted by someone wearing a badge. The flashing red and blue lights reflected across the polished marble steps outside the Jefferson County Courthouse as cameras turned, microphones stretched forward, and dozens of people stopped to watch what looked like another routine police investigation. Officer Daniel Brooks stood with practiced confidence beside a black SUV, his expression calm enough to convince anyone that justice was unfolding exactly as it should. Across from him, Assistant District Attorney Naomi Carter remained perfectly still. Her charcoal business suit was immaculate despite the humid Alabama afternoon, and the leather briefcase resting beside her feet carried years of carefully prepared cases against organized corruption inside local law enforcement. She had spent nearly a decade earning a reputation that could not be bought, threatened, or intimidated. Yet on this morning, none of that seemed to matter. Daniel slowly reached inside the open driver's side door, disappearing from view for only a second before standing upright again with a small evidence bag held carefully between two gloved fingers. His voice rang out loudly enough for every television camera to capture. "Miss Carter, would you care to explain why illegal narcotics were found inside your vehicle?" A ripple of shocked whispers spread across the growing crowd. Reporters immediately raised their cameras higher while courthouse employees exchanged confused glances. Some recognized Naomi instantly. Others simply recognized the unmistakable image of a respected prosecutor suddenly standing beside what appeared to be criminal evidence. Daniel shook his head with the quiet disappointment of someone pretending he wished the discovery had never happened. "I didn't expect this from someone in your position," he said, allowing the sentence to hang in the warm afternoon air. Naomi never reached for the evidence. She never protested. She never raised her voice. Instead, she looked directly into Daniel's eyes with an expression so calm that it seemed almost out of place. "Officer," she asked softly, "are you absolutely certain that's everything?" For the first time, Daniel hesitated, though only for a heartbeat. Then he smiled with the confidence of a man who believed every move had already been calculated. "That's all we need." The reporters scribbled faster. Live news feeds switched to breaking coverage. Social media notifications exploded as headlines began spreading across phones throughout the city. District Attorney's Office under investigation. Prosecutor linked to drug evidence. Corruption charges expected. The words traveled faster than facts ever could. A younger patrol officer standing several feet away shifted uneasily, glancing from Daniel to Naomi before lowering his eyes toward the pavement. Something about the scene felt wrong, though he couldn't explain why. Daniel ignored him completely. His attention remained fixed on the cameras recording what he believed would become the defining victory of his career. Naomi quietly lifted her hands as another officer stepped forward to escort her toward an unmarked vehicle. She offered no resistance. No anger crossed her face. No fear appeared in her eyes. As the courthouse doors reflected the flashing emergency lights behind her, Naomi glanced briefly toward the small black device clipped beneath the lapel of her blazer, almost too subtle for anyone nearby to notice. Then she whispered just loudly enough for Daniel to hear. "The truth has a remarkable memory." The ride to the federal courthouse annex lasted less than 15 minutes. But for millions of people following the story online, it was more than enough time to reach a verdict. News anchors repeated the same photographs across every television screen. Commentators questioned how a respected prosecutor could have hidden illegal drugs inside her own vehicle. Anonymous accounts flooded social media with accusations, speculation, and celebration, each post spreading faster than the last. Inside the quiet rear seat of the government vehicle, Naomi Carter watched none of it. She sat with her hands folded neatly in her lap, her breathing slow and steady, as though she were preparing for an ordinary afternoon hearing instead of watching her professional reputation collapse in real time. Across from her, a deputy marshal studied her face with quiet curiosity. Most people in her position demanded answers, protested every accusation, or searched desperately for someone to blame. Naomi did none of those things. She simply looked out the window as the courthouse disappeared behind them and the skyline reflected across the glass. The deputy finally spoke. "You seem unusually calm." Naomi offered a polite smile that revealed nothing. Panic has never improved the quality of evidence. The answer lingered in the silence long after she finished speaking. Meanwhile, Officer Daniel Brooks stood surrounded by reporters outside the courthouse steps, carefully choosing every word. He described the discovery as unfortunate but necessary. He praised transparency. He emphasized accountability. Every sentence strengthened the image he wanted the public to believe. Several officers standing behind him nodded in agreement, but not everyone looked comfortable. Officer Ethan Morales remained near the patrol vehicles, unable to ignore the uneasy feeling that had settled over him since the search. He replayed the sequence repeatedly in his mind. Daniel had insisted on checking the driver's side alone. He had blocked everyone's view for several seconds. Then, almost immediately, the evidence appeared. Ethan remembered the confidence in Daniel's voice, but he also remembered Naomi's question. "Are you absolutely certain that is everything?" It had not sounded like fear. It had sounded like certainty. Hours later, inside the temporary holding office reserved for public officials under investigation, Naomi placed her briefcase carefully on the table after it was returned following standard inventory procedures. She removed a legal pad, a fountain pen, and several neatly organized folders before quietly writing the exact time of every event she could remember. She recorded each statement, every location, every witness, every camera she had noticed. Even the position of Daniel's patrol vehicle was written down with precise detail. Nothing was added from emotion. Nothing was exaggerated. Facts were enough. Outside the room, federal investigator Rebecca Lawson watched through the observation window. She had expected frustration or disbelief. Instead, she found discipline. "She is building a timeline," Rebecca quietly observed. "That is not something an innocent person does because they are desperate. That is something an experienced prosecutor does because she already knows the truth will eventually need a map." At nearly the same moment, Daniel arrived home believing the hardest part was over. He loosened his tie, poured himself a glass of iced tea, and turned on the evening news with a satisfied smile. Every station carried the same story. Every headline repeated Naomi's name. He leaned back, convinced that the case against her would dominate every conversation by sunrise. What he never considered was that while headlines could shape public opinion, they could not rewrite a single second that had already been recorded. The following morning, the city awakened to certainty, or at least what looked like certainty. Coffee shops, office break rooms, courthouse hallways, and neighborhood diners all carried the same conversation. People who had never met Naomi Carter spoke confidently about her guilt because they had watched a 30-second news clip the night before. Others quietly wondered how someone with an unblemished career could suddenly become the center of a criminal investigation. But those voices were almost impossible to hear beneath the noise. Inside the district attorney's office, framed photographs of successful prosecutions still lined the hallway outside Naomi's former office. Each picture captured years of dedication, late nights, and victories earned through careful preparation rather than dramatic courtroom speeches. Her nameplate remained on the door, untouched, while several employees walked past without saying a word. Some avoided looking at it entirely. Others stopped for only a second before continuing down the corridor, uncertain whether they were witnessing the fall of an admired colleague or the beginning of something they did not yet understand. Federal investigator Rebecca Lawson entered the office carrying a slim folder containing Naomi's employment history. There were no disciplinary actions, no ethics complaints, no unexplained financial records. Every annual evaluation described the same qualities: thorough, honest, precise, unshakable under pressure. Rebecca quietly closed the folder and looked toward the empty office. People rarely changed overnight. Reputations built over 10 years did not disappear because of one afternoon unless someone had worked very hard to make that happen. Across town, Officer Daniel Brooks enjoyed a very different morning. Fellow officers congratulated him for what they believed was a major breakthrough. Several local radio hosts praised his professionalism, describing him as proof that no public official should be above the law. Daniel accepted every compliment with practiced humility, thanking reporters while insisting that he had simply done his job. Yet beneath the confident smile, he checked the news far more often than usual, refreshing every website to make certain the story remained exactly where he wanted it. At the police department, Officer Ethan Morales could not silence the questions growing louder inside his own mind. He requested access to the standard evidence log and carefully reviewed the inventory completed after the vehicle search. Everything appeared normal. Every signature matched procedure. Every timestamp seemed accurate. Still, something refused to fit. Daniel had always been confident, but yesterday he had seemed rehearsed, almost as though every sentence had been prepared long before the search even began. Ethan leaned back in his chair, replaying Naomi's final words once again. The truth has a remarkable memory. Most people facing public disgrace pleaded for trust. She had spoken about memory. That single difference refused to leave him alone. Meanwhile, inside the secure federal holding office, Naomi requested only one thing from Rebecca Lawson. She did not ask for public statements. She did not ask for interviews. She did not ask anyone to defend her reputation. Instead, she calmly slid a handwritten timeline across the table. Rebecca studied several pages filled with exact times, witness locations, camera positions, and observations recorded with remarkable precision. At the very bottom, one final sentence stood. Alone, written in careful block letters. Please obtain every available recording before anyone has an opportunity to forget what really happened. Rebecca looked up slowly. Naomi met her eyes without hesitation. Neither woman smiled. Neither needed to. Somewhere inside the countless digital files created during that ordinary afternoon, the truth was waiting with perfect patience. By late afternoon, the investigation had quietly split into two completely different stories. The public saw a celebrated prosecutor under suspicion. Behind secured government doors, however, experienced investigators began asking questions that never appeared on television. Rebecca Lawson requested surveillance recordings from the courthouse parking structure, traffic cameras surrounding the block, and every official recording created during the search. None of those requests attracted media attention. They looked routine, almost boring, buried beneath hundreds of pages of ordinary paperwork. That was exactly how Rebecca preferred it. Experience had taught her that truth rarely announced its arrival with dramatic headlines. It usually appeared disguised as an overlooked timestamp or a forgotten camera angle. While technicians gathered digital evidence, Daniel Brooks continued enjoying the attention that came with his apparent success. Invitations for interviews arrived from local news stations. Community leaders praised his commitment to accountability. Even several senior officials congratulated him in passing. Every compliment reinforced the belief that his version of events had become permanent. He answered questions with measured confidence, repeating that facts mattered more than opinions and that no individual stood above the law. The words sounded convincing because they were the same principles Naomi herself had defended throughout her career. Meanwhile, Officer Ethan Morales found himself returning again and again to the parking area where the search had taken place. The yellow evidence markers were gone, reporters had disappeared, and ordinary courthouse traffic had returned as though nothing unusual had happened. Standing near the parking space, he slowly turned in a complete circle, studying every mounted security camera fixed to nearby buildings. One overlooked camera faced the entrance from an unexpected angle. Another overlooked the sidewalk leading toward the courthouse steps. Neither camera had been mentioned during the initial reports. Ethan quietly photographed their locations before walking away without telling anyone why. Inside the Federal Evidence Laboratory, technicians organized dozens of digital files collected from nearby cameras. Each recording was carefully labeled according to time and location. Rebecca watched the progress without interrupting. She understood that investigations were rarely solved by dramatic discoveries. Instead, they were assembled piece by piece until the truth became impossible to ignore. A senior analyst approached carrying a clipboard. "Everything appears complete except one file," he explained. "One recording has not yet been uploaded into the central archive." Rebecca looked up immediately. "Which recording?" The analyst checked his notes. "Personal body camera footage assigned under a voluntary evidence retention program. The file was automatically encrypted before transfer." Rebecca paused for only a moment. She remembered Naomi's unusual calm, her detailed timeline, and the almost invisible glance toward the device attached beneath her blazer. Without changing her expression, Rebecca signed the authorization requesting access to the encrypted recording. Across town, Daniel finished another interview and switched off his television with quiet satisfaction. The story had unfolded exactly as he expected. Public opinion had settled. Careers had shifted. Reputations had cracked. He believed the hardest questions had already been answered. What he never imagined was that the smallest recording in the entire investigation, stored inside an encrypted file that almost everyone overlooked, had never relied on public opinion at all. It had simply captured every passing second with perfect patience, waiting for someone willing to press play. Rebecca Lawson sat quietly inside the Federal Digital Evidence Lab as the encrypted file finished transferring onto an isolated workstation. No one in the room spoke. The only sounds came from cooling fans inside the computers and the occasional click of a keyboard as technicians verified digital signatures. Every file collected during the investigation had already been authenticated, but this recording required an additional layer of verification because it had been automatically encrypted the moment it was created. The lead analyst carefully compared the file hash against the original registry. Every character matched perfectly. No edits. No interruptions. No missing seconds. Rebecca folded her arms without taking her eyes off the monitor. "Open it," she said calmly. The screen came alive with a timestamp from the previous afternoon. The image was steady, recorded from a camera positioned near the center of Naomi Carter's blazer. Unlike the dramatic television clips that had spread across the country, this recording captured everything from her perspective. The first several minutes appeared completely ordinary. Courthouse employees exchanged greetings. Attorneys crossed the parking lot carrying briefcases. A maintenance worker pushed a supply cart across the sidewalk. Nothing suggested that history was quietly arranging itself only a few yards away. Rebecca noticed Naomi greeting everyone with the same composed professionalism she had become known for throughout her career. There was no urgency, no fear, no indication that she expected anything unusual to happen. Then another detail caught Rebecca's attention. Naomi casually adjusted a folder beneath her arm, and for just an instant the camera reflected Officer Daniel Brooks approaching from the far side of the parking area. He was not responding to an emergency. He was not rushing toward an unfolding incident. Instead, he walked with remarkable purpose while frequently scanning the area around him. The analyst paused the recording. "That behavior is unusual," he observed quietly. Rebecca nodded but did not respond. "Continue." The footage resumed. Daniel greeted Naomi politely enough for anyone nearby to assume the encounter was routine. Their brief conversation remained professional, centered on an upcoming hearing involving misconduct allegations against several officers. Naomi answered every question calmly while maintaining respectful eye contact. Nothing about her words suggested confrontation. Yet Daniel continued glancing toward nearby reporters who had not even reached the scene yet, as though he expected attention before anything had actually happened. Rebecca leaned slightly closer to the screen. Small details often carried the greatest weight. A few seconds later, another image appeared in the reflection of a courthouse window. It lasted no more than an instant, but it revealed Daniel briefly turning away from Naomi while reaching inside his own patrol jacket before stepping toward her parked vehicle. The actual movement remained hidden behind the open driver's side door, exactly as Ethan Morales had described in his notes. The camera could not fully see what happened beyond the door, but the timing aligned perfectly with every observation Naomi had carefully written on her legal pad. The analyst froze the frame once more. "Interesting," he whispered. Rebecca slowly exhaled. "Not yet," she replied. "Interesting is not enough. We need certainty." The recording continued as Naomi quietly asked the same question that had puzzled everyone who heard it. "Officer, are you absolutely certain that is everything?" Watching it again from her perspective transformed the moment completely. There was no confusion in her voice. No panic. Only deliberate patience. Rebecca finally understood why. Naomi had never been speaking to Daniel alone. She had been speaking to every camera that was still recording, including the ones silently preserving each second from her own point of view, waiting for the one detail that everyone else had failed to notice. Rebecca asked the technicians to replay the recording at 1/4 speed. This time no one focused on Naomi. Every eye remained fixed on Daniel Brooks. Frame by frame, the ordinary parking lot transformed into a silent puzzle. The sunlight reflected differently across the courthouse windows. Passing vehicles briefly created moving mirrors along polished doors. A delivery truck rolled through the background at exactly the right moment, revealing angles that no one realized existed during the original investigation. The analyst enlarged one reflection after another, carefully synchronizing the body camera footage with the courthouse surveillance recordings and the traffic cameras collected earlier that afternoon. Each source alone revealed very little. Together, they began forming a timeline too precise to dismiss as coincidence. Rebecca leaned forward without saying a word. Then the analyst quietly stopped the playback. "There," he said. The image showed Daniel standing beside Naomi's vehicle with his back partially blocking the direct view. For less than 2 seconds, the reflection inside the driver's side window revealed his right hand moving downward while his left shoulder shielded the action from everyone standing nearby. The picture remained too distorted to identify an object, but the movement itself was unmistakable. Rebecca immediately requested synchronization with another camera overlooking the courthouse entrance. A second screen illuminated beside the first. The timestamps matched within fractions of a second. This angle could not see inside the vehicle either, but it clearly showed Daniel approaching the driver's door after briefly reaching inside his own jacket only moments earlier. The room fell silent again. Still, Rebecca refused to draw conclusions before every detail had been verified. "Continue," she instructed. The footage resumed. Naomi remained remarkably composed throughout the encounter, never interrupting, never arguing, never attempting to influence the officers around her. Instead, she carefully observed everything unfolding before her. Every glance, every statement, every movement. Rebecca finally understood why Naomi had immediately written such an exact timeline after the incident. She had not relied on memory alone. She had relied on observation. Meanwhile, across town, Daniel began noticing subtle changes that he could not explain. Calls from reporters suddenly slowed. A scheduled television interview was postponed without explanation. 2 supervisors who had enthusiastically congratulated him the previous day now answered his greetings with unusually brief conversations. Nothing dramatic had happened, yet the atmosphere around him felt different. During the afternoon briefing, he caught Officer Ethan Morales studying him from across the room before quietly looking away. Daniel forced a confident smile, telling himself that investigations naturally created tension. Still, an uncomfortable thought refused to disappear. Had someone found another camera? Later that evening, Rebecca gathered the investigation team inside a secure conference room. Digital displays covered one wall with synchronized timelines, maps, and still images collected from every available source. She pointed toward the center screen without raising her voice. "Yesterday, the public believed they watched an entire story," she said. "In reality, they watched only the part someone wanted them to see." She pressed a single key. Every recording advanced together in perfect synchronization. Individual clips that had seemed ordinary now supported one another with remarkable precision. A movement hidden in one recording appeared clearly reflected in another. A missing second from one angle was fully visible from the next. The puzzle was no longer made of separate pieces. It had become one continuous sequence. Rebecca slowly closed the presentation folder resting beside her. "Now," she said with quiet certainty, "we stop asking what might have happened and begin proving what actually did." The conference room remained silent as the synchronized recordings reached the exact moment everyone had been waiting for. Rebecca Lawson stood near the display while investigators leaned forward without realizing they were holding their breath. On the largest screen, Naomi Carter approached her vehicle exactly as she had on that afternoon. A second screen showed the courthouse entrance. A third displayed the reflection captured by the body camera. Individually, each recording appeared ordinary. Together, they told a story that no witness could have reconstructed from memory alone. "Play them together," Rebecca instructed. The timestamps aligned perfectly. Daniel Brooks approached Naomi with a professional smile, exchanged a few routine words, then subtly glanced across the parking lot. The synchronized traffic camera confirmed exactly where every nearby officer had been standing. The courthouse surveillance camera established the distance between Daniel and the reporters. Naomi's body camera quietly preserved every second from her perspective. Then the sequence reached the critical moment. Daniel stepped toward the driver's side door and briefly disappeared behind it. The direct view remained blocked, exactly as it had seemed during the original investigation. But the reflected image inside the courthouse window continued recording from another angle. The analyst enlarged the reflection while matching it with the body camera footage. Daniel's right hand clearly moved from inside his own jacket toward the interior of Naomi's vehicle before returning empty. No one in the room spoke. The movement lasted barely 2 seconds, yet it completely changed the meaning of everything that followed. Rebecca requested one final enhancement. The analyst isolated the reflected motion and synchronized it with the traffic camera positioned across the street. Although neither recording alone revealed the complete action, both confirmed the same sequence with matching timestamps down to the fraction of a second. There was no unexplained gap, no missing footage, no opportunity for anyone else to approach the vehicle during that interval. The room remained motionless as the recording continued. Seconds later, Daniel announced the discovery of the evidence with complete confidence, exactly where his own movements had already been documented moments before. Rebecca slowly turned away from the monitors. "That is enough," she said quietly. Within the hour, a federal magistrate reviewed the authenticated recordings along with the synchronized timeline prepared by the investigation team. Every digital file carried verified chain of custody documentation. Every timestamp had been independently confirmed. Every recording supported the next without contradiction. The magistrate closed the evidence binder and signed a new series of legal authorizations. Meanwhile, Daniel sat inside his office reviewing paperwork when 2 investigators from the Office of Professional Responsibility entered without urgency or raised voices. Their expressions remained professional. One of them placed a sealed folder on the desk. "Officer Brooks," he said calmly, "we need to discuss newly authenticated evidence concerning yesterday's investigation." Daniel attempted a polite smile. "I assume this is just another follow-up interview." The investigator opened the folder and turned the first page toward him. It contained a still image captured from the synchronized recordings. Daniel's expression changed almost instantly. For the first time since the investigation began, he stopped searching for the right words. His eyes remained fixed on the photograph while the room grew impossibly quiet. Hundreds of miles of digital recordings, thousands of synchronized frames, and one unnoticed body camera had accomplished what public opinion never could. They had replaced assumption with evidence, and evidence was something no carefully rehearsed story could ever outrun. By sunrise the following day, the investigation had shifted beyond a single accusation. Every authenticated recording, every verified timestamp, and every synchronized camera angle had been organized into a comprehensive report reviewed by both federal investigators and state prosecutors. What had begun as an apparent case against Naomi Carter was now being examined as a possible abuse of official authority. Inside the courthouse, the atmosphere felt entirely different from only 24 hours earlier. The same hallways that had echoed with whispers about Naomi's reputation now carried quiet conversations about evidence, procedure, and accountability. No one rushed to conclusions anymore. The facts had demanded their attention. Rebecca Lawson entered the federal conference room carrying the completed investigative file. Across the table sat senior officials from multiple agencies, each reviewing identical copies of the report. There were no dramatic speeches, no emotional arguments. Page after page documented the digital evidence with careful precision. The synchronized recordings, the authenticated body camera file, the surveillance footage, the traffic cameras, the witness statements, and Naomi's handwritten timeline all pointed toward the same conclusion. Independent evidence had reached independent agreement. One official quietly closed the binder before speaking. The evidence supports criminal charges related to the misuse of official authority and the fabrication of evidence. The room remained silent for several seconds before every required authorization was signed. Meanwhile, Daniel Brooks sat alone in an interview room reviewing the same photographs that investigators had shown him the previous evening. The confidence that had carried him through countless television interviews had disappeared. He searched each image, hoping to find an explanation that no longer existed. Every reflection, every timestamp, and every synchronized frame confirmed the same sequence. Facts had quietly replaced assumptions. Outside the room, Officer Ethan Morales watched investigators move through the hallway carrying evidence boxes collected from Daniel's office and patrol vehicle under proper legal authority. Ethan lowered his eyes for a moment, remembering how easily he could have ignored the uneasy feeling that first afternoon. One unanswered question had led investigators toward dozens of verified answers. Later that afternoon, Naomi Carter was formally informed that every allegation against her had been dismissed after investigators completed their review of the authenticated recordings. Rebecca personally delivered the news inside the federal office where Naomi had patiently waited throughout the investigation. Naomi accepted the written notice with the same calm expression she had carried since the beginning. She did not celebrate. She did not criticize anyone. She simply thanked every investigator who had allowed the evidence to speak before reaching judgment. As she stepped outside, reporters immediately gathered across the courthouse plaza once again. This time the cameras captured a very different image. Instead of hurried accusations, microphones carried questions about integrity, accountability, and public trust. Naomi paused only briefly before answering. Every person deserves to be judged by verified facts, not by the loudest story. Her words spread across the same news stations that had questioned her only days earlier. Before sunset, official records confirmed that Daniel Brooks had been taken into custody under lawful process, pending judicial proceedings related to the investigation. The headlines changed almost instantly. Television commentators who had confidently discussed Naomi's guilt now spent hours examining the digital evidence that had transformed the case. Yet the most powerful change did not appear on any broadcast. It appeared quietly inside the courthouse itself, where people who had once rushed past Naomi's office now stopped outside her door, reminded that reputations can be damaged in moments, but the truth often arrives one verified frame at a time. Several weeks later, the courthouse had returned to its familiar rhythm. Attorneys hurried through security carrying heavy case files. Clerks greeted one another with quiet smiles. Judges moved from courtroom to courtroom according to schedules that rarely changed. To anyone walking through the marble corridors for the first time, it looked like an ordinary government building where another ordinary workday had begun. Yet for those who had witnessed everything unfold, the building no longer felt quite the same. People paused before making assumptions. They looked more carefully at evidence. They listened a little longer before reaching conclusions. The lesson had settled into the walls without anyone needing to say it aloud. Naomi Carter returned to her office carrying the same leather briefcase she had held on the afternoon when her life had nearly been rewritten by someone else's deception. The photographs outside her office remained exactly where they had always been, but this time her colleagues greeted her with genuine respect rather than uncertain silence. She thanked each of them with the same quiet professionalism that had defined her career long before the investigation began. She never spoke about revenge. She never celebrated another person's downfall. Instead, she focused on the work waiting on her desk because justice, she believed, was never about winning arguments. It was about protecting the truth, even when the truth required patience. Rebecca Lawson stopped by later that afternoon carrying a small evidence box scheduled for permanent archival storage. Inside rested the body camera that had silently documented every crucial moment. Rebecca placed it on Naomi's desk for one final review before it was transferred into official custody. Naomi looked at the small black device for several seconds without touching it. "Amazing," Rebecca said softly. "How something so small changed everything." Naomi smiled gently. "It did not change the truth. It simply preserved it." Rebecca nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. Outside, Officer Ethan Morales stood near the courthouse entrance watching people move through the plaza. He had spent days wondering whether he should have recognized the warning signs sooner. Eventually, he accepted an important reality. Integrity was not measured by never having doubts. It was measured by having the courage to follow those doubts wherever the evidence honestly led. That realization stayed with him long after the investigation ended. Months later, new officers entering the department quietly heard the story during ethics training. Not every detail was discussed, and no dramatic speeches accompanied the lesson. Instructors simply reminded them that authority carried enormous responsibility and that every action might someday be examined from angles they never expected. Technology could preserve moments. Procedures could verify facts. But character remained the one thing no camera could create after the fact. As the evening sun settled behind the courthouse, golden light reflected across the same windows that had unknowingly captured the turning point of the entire case. People walked past them without realizing those panes of glass had once reflected a truth hidden in plain sight. Naomi paused on the courthouse steps before heading home. taking one quiet look at the building where her reputation had nearly been destroyed and ultimately restored. She did not see it as the place where she had been falsely accused. She saw it as the place where evidence proved stronger than assumption. And perhaps that is how justice survives. Not because power never makes mistakes, but because truth has a remarkable way of waiting patiently until someone is willing to see it. In the end, a badge could influence a moment, a headline could shape a day, and a lie could travel astonishingly fast, but neither power nor rumor could outrun the simple, enduring strength of an honest record.